This happened last summer. I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from a very wealthy family. His dad is like an IP lawyer who contracts with the US government or something. They've got a bunch of properties all over the country and a handful of international ones too. That's the kind of wealth I'm talking about. One of their houses is on a relatively large but overall pretty secluded lake. The lake itself isn't so big that you can't see the houses on the other side of it, but it would be a workout and half swimming across the whole thing. James' parents were never around, so he pretty much had unlimited access to that house, and he often invited friends over with permission, of course. There's something about being out on the lake that makes you feel invincible. It's a different feeling than the beach for sure. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but there's more of an exclusive vibe to it. Hopefully, I can be successful enough to afford one day, like I said. The lake itself is pretty secluded with fancy houses lining the perimeter, but most of them would usually sit dark and empty. A lot of them were vacation homes for people who barely even use them. It's honestly kind of a shame thinking about it. There are upsides to that, though. James would throw the craziest parties there because there were usually no neighbors to call the police. This night was different, though it was just the two of us having a more chill night. I won't get into it, but I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years and I was in dire need of some bro time. We were having a few beers out on the dock when I noticed a light flicking across the lake. I can't remember exactly what time it was at first. I thought it was just the sun perfectly reflecting off something into my eye, but even when I moved my head to the side, I could still see it. It was flashing like someone was turning a light on and off repeatedly. I told James, and the two of us became fixed on it, trying to figure out what it could be. At some point, we realized the flashing wasn't random, it was following a pattern. Three short bursts, followed by three longer ones, followed by three short ones. I guess I'm dumb for not knowing this, but James snapped his finger and said it was Morse code. I looked at him like he was crazy and asked him when in the world he had learned Morse code. He told me he didn't actually know it, but he knew what three short, three long, three short means. SOS. I called BS and pulled out my phone, but to my surprise, he was actually right. Like I said, maybe I'm dumb for not knowing that, but I'm not really one. For obscure knowledge, anyway, the flashing continued for another minute or so, following that same pattern before stopping abruptly. The two of us had just been staring at it. The whole time, I really didn't know what to think. It could have been a joke, but there was always that chance that someone was actually in trouble. James immediately suggested calling the cops, but I reminded him that we'd been drinking and we weren't legal yet. I was honestly fighting a DUI charge at the time. So the last thing I needed was another run in with the police. He wasn't thrilled about that answer, and I could tell he was torn about the situation. The two of us couldn't really think of a rational explanation besides a kidnapping or something along those lines. We thought it might have been someone who had fallen and needed help, but that didn't make any sense because they probably would have just called the police. We've always been those adventurous delinquent type guys. So we decided it was worth checking out ourselves. If it turned out to be serious, we'd call the police. Then we went back inside. James' brother had a bunch of switch blades laying around his room. He was kind of a weird kid, so we grabbed a few of them just for peace of mind. James said he was good to drive and that we should drive around the lake to that house, but I told him I really wasn't comfortable with that for obvious reason. He joked about my situation and I laughed it off. If we weren't driving, there was only really one other option. The two of us walked back out of the yard and dragged James' dad cake into the water. We were laughing at first, enjoying the adventure of it all, but the further out we got onto the lake, the quieter we got. I think both of us realized how dumb of an idea it was, but neither of us wanted to be the one to spoil the fun. The sun had almost fully set at that point and it was getting harder to see it. It wasn't pitch black or anything. We had light from some of the lake houses to guide us, but it was still a bit unsettling as we got closer to the house. came into view. It was big like the other, but it was obviously not maintained very well for starters. The dog was half collapsed, literally half of it was just sunken into the water. The flashing had also stopped, which was kind of a bad sign too. We had planned on just tying the keg to the dog, but we obviously couldn't do that anymore given how unstable it looked. Luckily, the yacht wasn't too high up above the water, so we beat the keg on the yacht instead, careful not to slip on the rocks. I felt the adrenaline rush start coming on. I could tell James was feeling the same thing. We looked up toward the light had been coming from the second floor, that much we knew. James was freaking out at that point and insisted that we just leave and call the police. I told him we'd have to take all the way back to his house to even do that, as there was no service on the lake and that we need to connect to Wi-Fi. I reminded him that we had explored a million abandoned buildings before and this wasn't too different. He wasn't thrilled with that logic but agreed anyway. Believe me, I know how dumb this was. Everyone I talked to about this shares that some opinion, but I have never been one to make good decisions, and neither is James. We didn't walk to the front door. That would have been suicide. Instead, we crept around the house until we found a window that was unlocked. The two of us silently slipped inside. The house was empty, not just abandoned, but empty, like stripped. There was no furniture and no junk in there either. To be frank, there was no signs that anyone had ever even lived there. The floors and walls were completely bare. We moved cautiously through the rooms looking for the stairs. There was no one inside, and all the rooms were just as empty as the first one had been. We finally found the stairs and slowly made our way up. I had made a mental note of where the window was, and we slowly walked down one of the hallways until we got to what I guess was the room the light had been coming from. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. I glanced over at James. He nodded and I carefully pushed the door open. The room was empty with the exception of one thing by the window. I tiptoed over to it and realized what it was. It was one of those projectors and it was facing the window. Alarms bells immediately started going off. In my head, this was a trap. Someone had set this up deliberately. James must have realized the same thing because I just hear him start sprinting back the way we had came. Not even trying to be quiet, I turned without another thought and followed him as we were running down the stairs. I heard the door, presumably a closet door, swing open from the room I had just been in, followed by a rapid thumping sound. We bolted down the stairs and back through the house to that first window. James jumped through and I was next. As I was climbing through, I heard those footsteps from behind me again, bounding down the stairs. I didn't even look. I just made it through the window and ran to catch up with James, who was already down by the lake's edge. As I was running to catch up to him, I heard him curse and I quickly realized why. The cake was gone. I turned and from the side of the house there was a person running toward us. I could barely process what I was seeing. He was fast. I couldn't get a good look at him, but he was big, definitely an adult. I pulled out my switchblade ready to defend myself. I expected James to do the same, but instead he turned and jumped straight into the lake sneakers hoodie. Everything. I didn't even think. I just followed. The water was freezing, but I didn't care. I swam as fast as I could, trying to fight the burning sensation in my arms and legs. We swam toward the light from James' house, which looked like it was miles away. The swim felt endless, but on pure adrenaline we made it. By the time we dragged ourselves onto James' dock, I thought I had hypothermia. I don't think I have ever been that cold in my life. We ran straight inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to show up. It was honestly kind of outrageous when they finally did. They went straight across the lake to investigate. They were over there for a while, but when they came back, they told us exactly what I expected to hear, that there was no one. They confirmed this house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent occupancy, no footprints, no gear, no personal belongings, nothing, just an empty house. They weren't happy with us. They gave us the whole why didn't call for a speech. James' parents were even more pissed when they found out. Let's just say I wasn't invited. back to the lake house. After that, James told me his parents were threatening to the town for allowing something like that to happen and the police for refusing to investigate further. As for me, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was in that house or why they set that trap or what they planned to do if we hadn't run. I don't think I want to. Most of my friends agree that it was a trap and think that whoever was planning the whole thing got cold feet until the last minute. I really don't want to think about what would have happened if they had gone through with whatever they were planning on doing.